The notification appeared on my phone screen just as I was walking out of the federal courthouse in downtown Chicago. I had just secured a landmark settlement for a class action lawsuit against a pharmaceutical giant. 7 years of legal warfare. That would put $32 million back into the pockets of victims who deserved justice. My phone buzzed, and there it was, a text from my mother. "We sold Grandma Rose's estate. Already closed. We'll explain later." I stopped dead in my tracks on the marble steps, my briefcase nearly slipping from my fingers. Before we jump back, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Isabella Martinez, and at 31, I've built a reputation as one of the most tenacious civil rights attorneys in the Midwest. I've taken on corporations that thought they were untouchable, fought for families who had nowhere else to turn, and won cases that other lawyers said were impossible. But standing there in the shadow of Lady Justice herself, none of my courtroom victories mattered. The estate they had just sold was supposed to be mine. Grandma Rose had been the anchor of our family, the woman who taught me that justice wasn't just a word. It was a responsibility. She had immigrated to Chicago from Mexico in 1952 with nothing but a fierce determination to build something lasting for her family. Over 5 decades, she transformed a small corner grocery store into a thriving market that became the heart of our neighborhood. When she passed 3 years ago, she left behind more than just a business. She left behind a legacy, a beautiful Victorian house in Lincoln Park, and a trust fund that was meant to secure my future. But my parents had different ideas about what that future should look like. Growing up, I was always the odd one out in the Martinez family. While my older brother Diego was groomed to take over the family's construction business, I was the one with my nose buried in books, dreaming of law school and fighting for justice. My parents tolerated my ambitions with the kind of patient condescension reserved for children who insist they want to be astronauts. "Mija," my father would say with that familiar sigh, "the law is no place for a woman like you. You should find a nice husband, maybe help Diego with the business books." But Grandma Rose saw something different in me. She saw the fire that burned when I witnessed injustice, the way I couldn't let things go when someone was being treated unfairly. She encouraged me to apply to Northwestern Law School, even when my parents said it was a waste of money. She believed in me when no one else did, and when I graduated summa cum laude, she was the one crying tears of pride in the front row. The inheritance wasn't just money, it was validation. It was her way of saying that she believed in the woman I had become and the lawyer I was destined to be. The estate included her house, worth roughly $2 million in today's market, the building that housed her former grocery store, and a trust fund worth another $800,000. It was meant to give me the financial freedom to take on the cases that mattered, to fight for justice without worrying about billable hours or keeping corporate clients happy. But apparently my parents had been managing the estate as trustees, and they had decided that selling everything was in the family's best interest. I called my mother immediately, my hands shaking as I dialed. She answered on the second ring, her voice cheerful and oblivious to the storm brewing on the other end of the line. "Isabella, perfect timing. Your father and I just got back from the lawyer's office. We have wonderful news about Grandma's estate." "Mom," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady, "you just sold my inheritance without even discussing it with me." "Oh, don't be so dramatic, mija. We didn't sell your inheritance. We made a smart business decision. The market is so good right now, and Diego's construction company has been struggling. This gives us the capital we need to expand, maybe bid on some of those big city contracts." There it was, Diego, always Diego. Even in death, Grandma Rose's legacy was being redirected to support the golden child who had never once questioned the path laid out for him. That money was left to me, Mom. The house, the building, the trust fund. Grandma Rose specifically wanted me to have those things. And you will eventually. But right now, the family needs this more than you do. You have your little law. Practice. You're doing fine. Diego has employees depending on him, contracts to fulfill. We're thinking about the bigger picture here. My little law practice. I had just won a $32 million settlement, but to them, I was still playing lawyer while Diego was running a real business. Where exactly am I supposed to live when my lease is up next month? I asked, knowing I had been planning to move into Grandma Rose's house, the house that was now sold to strangers. You can always move back home, mija. Your old room is still there. It might be good for you to save some money anyway. Maybe think about settling down instead of working. All these crazy hours. The suggestion hit me like a physical blow. Move back into my childhood bedroom, surrounded by the same people who had never believed I could build something meaningful on my own. Go back to being the family disappointment who was wasting her time on impossible dreams. But what they didn't, no, what they had never bothered to learn, was that I hadn't just been building a career for the past decade. I had been building something much more powerful. When I was 25 and fresh out of law school, I met an elderly man named Samuel Fletcher at a legal aid clinic. He was a retired appellate judge who had spent 40 years on the bench, and he became my mentor in ways that went far beyond courtroom strategy. Judge Fletcher taught me that the law wasn't just about winning cases. It was about understanding the intricate web of statutes, precedents, and procedures that most people never even knew existed. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Under his guidance, I didn't just study current law. I studied legal history, estate, planning, and the arcane world of trust and inheritance law. I learned about the safeguards that wise lawyers built into their documents, the hidden clauses and protective mechanisms that most people overlooked. I spent countless hours in law libraries, reading cases from the 1800s, understanding how the law had evolved to protect people from exactly the kind of situation I now found myself in. Judge Fletcher always said that knowledge was the most powerful weapon a lawyer could wield, but only if you knew where to look for it. He taught me to read legal documents like a detective, to spot the subtle language that could change everything, to understand that sometimes the most important words were the ones that seemed insignificant to everyone else. When Grandma Rose was drafting her will and trust documents, she had asked me to recommend a lawyer. I connected her with Judge Fletcher's former law partner, Elizabeth Morrison, one of the most meticulous estate planning attorneys in Chicago. Elizabeth was known for building ironclad protections into her documents, layers of safeguards that ensured her clients' wishes would be honored exactly as intended. But I had never actually read the final documents myself. Grandma Rose had handled everything privately, and after her death, my parents had assured me that everything was straightforward. They were the trustees, they said, managing everything, until I was ready to handle such a large inheritance. What they didn't realize was that I had been ready to handle complex legal matters since the day I passed the bar exam. What they definitely didn't realize was that Elizabeth Morrison never drafted a simple trust document in her life. As I stood on those courthouse steps, watching Chicago bustling around me, I felt something I hadn't experienced since I was a child, being told I was too ambitious for my own good. But this time, instead of doubt, I felt a cold, calculating determination settling over me. I had spent 7 years fighting pharmaceutical companies, insurance giants, and corporate lawyers who thought they could intimidate me into backing down. I had learned to spot weakness in legal arguments, to find the single thread that could unravel an entire case. I had built a career on being underestimated, on walking into rooms where powerful men assumed I was just another naive young lawyer they could easily defeat. My parents had just made the same mistake. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found Elizabeth Morrison's number. If anyone would have copies of the original trust documents, it would be her. And if Judge Fletcher had taught me anything, it was that the devil was always in the details, details that most people were too impatient or too confident to read carefully. Elizabeth Morrison's office. This is Patricia speaking. Patricia, this is Isabella Martinez. I need to speak with Elizabeth about my grandmother's estate. Rosa Martinez. It's urgent. I'll put you right through, Ms. Martinez. Ms. Morrison has been expecting your call. Expecting my call? That was interesting. Elizabeth Morrison wasn't the type of lawyer who waited for clients to contact her. She was the type who anticipated problems long before they materialized. Isabella. Elizabeth's warm but professional voice came through the line. I was wondering when I'd hear from you. I assume this is about the sale of your grandmother's estate? You know about the sale? Honey, I know about everything that happens with the trusts I draft. Your parents called me last week to ask about the procedures for liquidating the assets. I told them they would need to follow very specific protocols, but I'm not sure they were listening carefully to what I was telling them. There was something in her tone, a careful precision that made my lawyer instincts sit up and take notice. Elizabeth Morrison wasn't just informing me about procedures. She was telling me something important without actually saying it. Elizabeth, I need to see the original trust documents. All of them. Of course. Can you come by my office tomorrow morning? Say, 9 o'clock? I think there are some clauses in your grandmother's trust that you'll find very interesting. Clauses that your parents seem to have overlooked in their eagerness to liquidate everything. After I hung up, I stood there for a long moment, watching the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the courthouse steps. My parents thought they had outmaneuvered me, thought they had taken advantage of my focus on my career to redirect my inheritance toward their preferred child. They had treated me like the naive little girl who used to dream about being a lawyer, not the woman who had spent the last decade learning every trick, every protection, every legal safeguard that existed. But tomorrow morning, I would find out exactly what protections Rosa Martinez had built into her legacy. Tomorrow, I would discover whether my grandmother had been as naive as my parents assumed, or whether she had been far more strategic than anyone realized. Because if there was one thing I had learned in my years of fighting impossible cases, it was that the biggest victories often came from the clauses that nobody bothered to read carefully. And something told me that Rosa Martinez, the woman who had built an empire from a corner grocery store, had been far too smart to leave her granddaughter's future vulnerable to the whims of people who had never believed in her potential. As I walked toward my car, I felt the familiar surge of energy that always came before a big case. This wasn't just about money or property. This was about honoring the woman who had believed in me when no one else did. This was about proving that underestimating Isabella Martinez was a mistake that people only made once. Tomorrow, I would find out just how protected my grandmother had made sure I really was. I arrived at Elizabeth Morrison's law office at exactly 9 o'clock the next morning, my mind having raced through possibilities all night. The office was located in a stately brownstone in River North, the kind of building that whispered old money and established power. Elizabeth had been practicing estate law for over 30 years, and her client list read like a who's who of Chicago's most influential families. If anyone knew how to build unbreakable legal protections, it was her. The receptionist led me through mahogany-paneled hallways lined with leather-bound legal volumes and portraits of distinguished judges. Elizabeth's corner office overlooked the Chicago River, and she stood silhouetted against the floor-to-ceiling windows, reviewing a thick file that I immediately recognized must be my grandmother's estate documents. "Isabella," she said, turning to greet me with a knowing smile. "You look exactly like Rosa did when she was your age." She had that same fire in her eyes when someone tried to tell her what she couldn't do. Elizabeth Morrison was a woman in her early 60s, with silver hair pulled back in an elegant chignon, and the kind of presence that commanded respect in any room. She had built her reputation on creating estate plans that were works of art, complex, multi-layered documents that anticipated every possible scenario and protected her clients' wishes with surgical precision. "Please, sit down," she said, gesturing to the chairs arranged around her conference table. We have quite a bit to discuss. She opened the file and spread out several documents, each one bearing official seals and notary stamps. Your grandmother came to me 4 years ago, shortly after your bar exam results came in. She was incredibly proud of you, Isabella. She talked about how you had graduated summa cum laude, how you were already making a name for yourself in civil rights law. But she was also worried. Worried about what? She was worried about your family's tendency to prioritize Diego's needs over yours. She told me about the college fund they had redirected to help him start his construction business, about the car they had promised you for graduation that somehow ended up being Diego's work truck. She said you had never complained, never demanded what was rightfully yours, but she could see how it affected you. I felt a familiar ache in my chest. Grandma Rose had noticed things that I thought I had hidden well. She had seen the disappointment. I tried to swallow every time my achievements were overshadowed by Diego's needs, every time my dreams were considered less important than his practical pursuits. She wanted to make sure that her legacy would truly be yours, Elizabeth continued. So we didn't just draft a simple will. We created what I call a fortress trust. Multiple layers of protection designed to ensure that her wishes would be carried out exactly as she intended, regardless of what anyone else thought was best for you. Elizabeth pulled out the first document, a thick packet bound with a blue backing. This is the primary trust document, but it's just the foundation. Your grandmother was very strategic about how she structured everything. As she began explaining the various components, I realized that Rosa Martinez had been far more sophisticated than anyone in my family had ever given her credit for. The woman who had built a neighborhood grocery store into a thriving business had approached her estate planning with the same methodical intelligence that had made her successful in the first place. The trust includes several trigger clauses, Elizabeth explained, her finger tracing specific paragraphs in the dense legal text. Your parents are listed as interim trustees, yes, but only with very limited powers. They can manage basic maintenance and administrative tasks, but any major decisions, particularly the sale of assets, require specific conditions to be met. My heart began to race as I understood what she was telling me. What kind of conditions? First, any sale of trust assets requires the unanimous consent of all 3 trustees. Your parents assumed they were the only trustees, but that's not accurate. Elizabeth smiled, the expression of a master strategist revealing her best move. You've been a co-trustee since the day you passed the bar exam. Every major decision requires your signature. The room seemed to spin around me. But they never told me I was a trustee. They never asked for my consent to sell anything. Exactly. Which means the sale they completed yesterday is legally invalid. But it gets better. Elizabeth turned to another section of the document. Your grandmother included what we call a protection of legacy clause. If anyone attempts to circumvent the trust requirements or act against the stated beneficiary's interests, they forfeit their trustee status immediately, and all authority transfers to the primary beneficiary. You. I stared at the documents, spread across the table, my legal mind racing through the implications. My parents hadn't just failed to get my consent for the sale, they had actively excluded me from the process. They had violated the fundamental terms of the trust in their eagerness to redirect my inheritance toward Diego's business. There's more, Elizabeth said, clearly enjoying my reaction. Rosa was particularly concerned about the possibility that your family might try to pressure you into accepting decisions you didn't agree with. So she included something I've never seen in another estate document, a clause that automatically voids any transaction if the primary beneficiary was not given at least 30 days to review all proposed changes and provide written consent. 30 days, I repeated, the significance hitting me. The sale happened less than 24 hours after they sent me that text message. Which means, legally speaking, the sale never happened. The buyers think they own property that's still held in trust, Your parents think they've successfully liquidated assets they never had the authority to sell. And you, well, you still own everything your grandmother intended you to have. But Elizabeth wasn't finished. She pulled out another document, this one bearing the letterhead of a major Chicago bank. Your grandmother also established what she called an independence fund, a separate account that most people would never think to look for. She deposited money there every month for the last 10 years of her life, specifically to ensure that, if anyone ever tried to manipulate your inheritance, you would have the resources to fight back. The account statement showed a balance of $347,000. Money that my parents knew nothing about. Money that Rosa Martinez had quietly set aside to make sure her granddaughter would never be powerless again. She left you a letter, Elizabeth said, softly, handing me an envelope with my name written in my grandmother's familiar handwriting. She asked me to give this to you, only if someone tried to interfere with her wishes. My hands trembled as I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter. The paper smelled faintly of the vanilla perfume Grandma Rose had worn every day of my childhood. Mi querida Isabella, the letter began. If you are reading this, it means someone in our family has forgotten that your dreams are just as important as anyone else's. I am not surprised. I have watched them underestimate you your entire life, just as people underestimated me when I was a young woman trying to build something meaningful in a world that told me I should be satisfied with less. You have something special, mija. You have the heart of a fighter and the mind of a strategist. You see injustice, and you cannot rest until you fix it. This is not a weakness, no matter what anyone tells you. This is your superpower. I built my business by being smarter than people expected, by planning ahead while others lived only for today. I have done the same with my estate. Everything I own, everything I built, it belongs to you not because you are my granddaughter, but because you are the one who will use it to make the world better. Do not let anyone convince you to be smaller than you are. Do not let anyone tell you that your dreams are less important than someone else's needs. You have earned your place in this world, and now you have the resources to claim it fully. Show them who Isabella Martinez really is. Show them what happens when they underestimate a woman who was raised to fight for justice. Con todo mi amor, Abuela Rosa. I wiped tears from my eyes, feeling a surge of connection to the woman who had always seen my potential even when I couldn't see it myself. Rosa Martinez had anticipated this exact scenario, had planned for the possibility that her own children would try to sabotage their daughter's future out of favoritism and short-sightedness. What do I need to do? I asked Elizabeth, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. We file an emergency injunction to halt the sale, citing the invalid trustee actions and lack of proper consent. Then we initiate proceedings to remove your parents as trustees for breach of fiduciary duty. The buyers will have to reverse the transaction. Your parents will lose any authority over the estate, and you will assume full control as the sole trustee and beneficiary. Elizabeth leaned back in her chair, clearly satisfied with the legal fortress she and my grandmother had constructed. Isabella, I've been practicing estate law for 3 decades, and I've never seen a more thoroughly protected inheritance. Your grandmother didn't just leave you money and property. She left you an unbreakable legal position. As the full scope of Rosa Martinez's planning became clear, I felt a profound shift in my understanding of both my grandmother and myself. She hadn't just been the sweet old lady who made the best tamales in the neighborhood. She had been a master strategist who had spent decades building not just financial wealth, but strategic power, and she had recognized that same potential in me. My phone buzzed with another text from my mother. Diego wants to thank you for being so understanding about the estate. The construction company is going to bid on 3 new projects with the capital. You're helping create jobs for 12 families. I stared at the message, marveling at how completely my family had misunderstood both the situation and my character. They thought I would quietly accept their decision because I had always been the accommodating one. the peacekeeper who swallowed her disappointment rather than create conflict. They had confused kindness with weakness, just as opposing lawyers had been doing my entire career. "Elizabeth," I said, looking up from my phone, "how long will it take to file the emergency injunction?" "We can have it filed this afternoon. The sale will be frozen immediately, and your parents will receive notice that their trustee authority has been revoked." "And the buyers?" "They'll be financially protected, of course. The seller had no legal right to sell the property, so they'll receive full restitution. It's an expensive lesson for your parents about the importance of reading legal documents carefully." I thought about Diego's construction company, about the 12 families my mother claimed would benefit from jobs created with my stolen inheritance. My family had always been skilled at making their selfishness sound noble, at framing their favoritism as sacrifice for the greater good. But Rosa Martinez had taught me a different definition of greater good. She had shown me that sometimes the most generous thing you can do is refuse to enable people who take advantage of your kindness. Sometimes helping people means forcing them to face the consequences of their choices, rather than continuously rescuing them from their own poor decisions. "File everything," I told Elizabeth. "I want the injunction, the trustee removal, and full control transferred to me as quickly as possible." As I prepared to leave Elizabeth's office, she handed me one final document. "Your grandmother also left instructions for something she called the Rosa Martinez Scholarship Fund. She wanted you to establish it once you had full control of the estate. It's designed to help young women from immigrant families pursue law degrees." I smiled, thinking about the law students who would benefit from Rosa's foresight, young women who would never have to choose between their dreams and their family's expectations because someone had cleared a path for them. "She really thought of everything, didn't she?" "She thought of everything because she understood exactly who you are," Elizabeth replied. She knew that Isabella Martinez wasn't the kind of woman who would be satisfied with just recovering what was stolen from her. She knew you would want to build something bigger, something that would help other people fight their own battles. As I walked out of the brownstone and into the Chicago morning, I felt the weight of my grandmother's confidence settling around me like armor. Rosa Martinez had seen past my family's limitations, past their narrow definitions of success and value. She had seen the woman I was becoming and had built a legal fortress to protect my potential. My phone rang. It was my mother. "Isabella, we need to talk. There's been some kind of mistake with the estate sale. Our lawyer is saying there might be problems with the paperwork." "No mistake, Mom," I said, my voice calm and certain. "Just consequences." For the first time in my life, I hung up on a family member who was trying to convince me to accept less than I deserved, and it felt like the most natural thing in the world. The emergency injunction was filed at 2:47 p.m. that same afternoon. By 4:30 p.m., my phone was ringing nonstop. First my mother, then my father, then Diego, then my mother again. I let every call go to voicemail while I sat in my downtown office, reviewing the case files that had been piling up while I dealt with my family's betrayal. Each voicemail was a masterclass in manipulation disguised as concern. My mother's voice, high and strained. "Isabella, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. The buyers are threatening to sue us. You need to call me immediately." My father, gruff and commanding. "Mija, this legal nonsense needs to stop. Family doesn't sue family. Call off your lawyers and let's work this out like adults." And Diego, the golden child himself. "Sis, I don't know what game you're playing, but you're hurting real people here. We already promised contracts to 3 crews based on this money." The entitlement was breathtaking. Even faced with legal consequences for their actions, they were casting themselves as the victims and me as the unreasonable aggressor who was disrupting their plans. But the voicemail that really revealed their character came at 6:15 p.m. from my mother. "Isabella, your father and I have been talking, and we think this legal career has made you too aggressive, too willing to fight your own family. Maybe it's time you considered a different path, something that won't put you at odds with the people who love you. We're worried about the person you're becoming. I played that message 3 times, marveling at the psychological manipulation packed into those few sentences. According to my mother, the problem wasn't that they had stolen my inheritance without my knowledge or consent. The problem was that I had developed the skills and confidence to fight back. My legal career wasn't something to be proud of. It was something that had corrupted my natural submissiveness and made me difficult to control. This was the same woman who had smiled proudly when I graduated from Northwestern Law School, who had bragged to her friends about her daughter the lawyer when it made her look good at church functions. But the moment my legal expertise became inconvenient for her plans, it transformed from an achievement into a character flaw. I was reviewing the trust documents one more time when my assistant knocked on my office door. "Ms. Martinez, there's a Marcus Delacroix here to see you. He says he's representing your family." Marcus Delacroix was a lawyer I knew by reputation, a smooth-talking estate attorney who specialized in helping wealthy families navigate complicated inheritance disputes. He was exactly the kind of lawyer who would tell my parents what they wanted to hear rather than what they needed to understand. "Send him in," I said, curious to see what strategy they thought would work against their own daughter. Delacroix strode into my office with the kind of confident swagger that usually intimidated opposing counsel. He was tall, expensively dressed, and carried himself with the assumption that his presence alone would be enough to resolve whatever little family squabble had gotten out of hand. "Ms. Martinez," he said, extending a manicured hand. "Marcus Delacroix, I represent your parents and your brother in this unfortunate misunderstanding about your grandmother's estate." I gestured for him to sit, but remained standing myself, a power move I had learned from years of courtroom experience. "Mr. Delacroix, there's no misunderstanding. My parents violated the terms of a trust they apparently never read carefully, and now they're facing the legal consequences of their actions." He pulled out a leather portfolio and arranged several documents on my desk. "I think if we look at this reasonably, we can find a solution that works for everyone. Your parents were acting in good faith, trying to maximize the value of the estate for the benefit of the entire family. Were they acting in good faith when they excluded the primary beneficiary from a decision that required her consent? Were they acting in good faith when they violated their fiduciary duty as trustees?" Delacroix's smile never wavered, but I could see him recalculating his approach. He had expected to intimidate a grieving granddaughter who was in over her head with complex legal matters. Instead, he was facing an experienced litigator who understood estate law better than he had anticipated. "Look, Isabella. May I call you Isabella? Your family is willing to be very generous here. They're prepared to offer you a settlement of $400,000, which is more than fair considering the debt obligations against the estate and the current market conditions." I almost laughed. $400,000 was less than half the value of just the house, and didn't include the business property or the trust fund at all. They were offering me a fraction of my own inheritance and calling it generous. "Mr. Delacroix, I'm going to give you some free legal advice. You should probably read the trust documents more carefully before making settlement offers. Specifically, you might want to look at Section 12, Paragraph C, which outlines the penalties for breach of fiduciary duty." I could see him trying to recall the details of whatever rushed briefing my parents had given him. They had probably told him their daughter was being difficult about a straightforward estate matter, not that they had walked into a legal trap, built by one of Chicago's most meticulous estate planning attorneys. "Additionally," I continued, "you might want to review Section 18, which addresses the personal liability of trustees who act outside their authority. Your clients aren't just facing the reversal of an invalid sale, they're potentially liable for damages, legal fees, and penalties." The color began to drain from Delacroix's face as he realized that this wasn't a simple family dispute he could resolve with charm and bluster. This was a complex legal matter where his clients had already lost before he even got involved. "Perhaps," he said carefully, "we should schedule a meeting where all parties can review the documents together and work toward a mutually beneficial resolution. The only resolution I'm interested in is the full enforcement of my grandmother's wishes as clearly outlined in the trust documents. My parents will lose their trustee status, the invalid's sale will be reversed, and I will assume complete control of the estate." After Delacroix left, looking considerably less confident than when he had arrived, I sat alone in my office watching the sun set over Chicago. Through my windows, I could see the neighborhood where Rosa Martinez had built her grocery store, where she had slowly and methodically created the foundation for everything I now controlled. My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "This is David Chen, the buyer of your grandmother's property. I heard about the legal situation. Can we talk?" David Chen turned out to be a young entrepreneur who had purchased Rosa's house as his first major real estate investment. He was polite, professional, and completely understanding when I explained that the sale had been invalid from the beginning. "I actually admire what you're doing," he said when we met at a coffee shop near the property. "My own family immigrated from Taiwan, and I know how complicated family dynamics can get around money and expectations. Your grandmother sounds like she was an incredible woman." "She was," I said. "She taught me that planning ahead is the best way to protect the people you care about." "Well, her planning certainly protected you. And honestly, the way your parents excluded you from this decision, that's exactly the kind of thing my grandmother would have anticipated and planned against." David's understanding made the contrast with my own family even sharper. A complete stranger could see the injustice of what my parents had done while they continued to insist that I was being unreasonable and ungrateful. The next morning brought a flurry of legal activity. Elizabeth Morrison filed the formal petition to remove my parents as trustees. The court issued a temporary restraining order preventing any further transactions involving the estate, and the buyers were officially notified that they needed to reverse the purchase. But the real turning point came when I received a call from Judge Patricia Ramirez, who was overseeing the estate matter. Judge Ramirez was a legend in Chicago legal circles, a woman who had fought her way up through a system that tried to limit her at every turn, who had never forgotten what it felt like to be underestimated because of her gender and background. "Ms. Martinez," she said, "I've reviewed the estate documents in this case, and I have to say, I'm impressed by the thoroughness of your grandmother's planning. But I'm also troubled by the actions of the interim trustees. Your Honor, my parents seem to believe that their intentions justify their violations of the trust terms. Yes, I've seen that argument before, usually from people who think family relationships exempt them from legal obligations." Judge Ramirez paused, and I could hear papers rustling in the background. "I'm scheduling an emergency hearing for tomorrow morning. I want all parties present, and I want the interim trustees to explain why they shouldn't be held in contempt for violating a court-supervised trust." The hearing was set for 9 a.m. in Judge Ramirez's courtroom. That evening, I spent hours preparing my presentation, reviewing every relevant statute and precedent, making sure I could articulate not just what my parents had done wrong, but why it mattered for the broader principle of fiduciary responsibility. But as I worked, I found myself thinking less about legal strategy and more about the woman who had made this moment possible. Rosa Martinez had understood something that I was only beginning to grasp. True power didn't come from being louder or more aggressive than everyone else. True power came from being more prepared, more strategic, and more committed to justice than anyone expected. She had taught me that lesson through her own life, the way she had quietly built her business while others dismissed her as just another immigrant trying to get by, the way she had accumulated wealth and influence while maintaining her reputation, as a generous neighbor and devoted grandmother. She had shown me that the most dangerous opponents were the ones who appeared harmless until the moment they revealed their true strength. The morning of the hearing, I arrived at the courthouse early, wearing the same navy suit I had worn for my bar exam and carrying the briefcase that had accompanied me through every major case of my career. The courtroom was nearly empty except for the court reporter and a few law students who had come to observe proceedings. My parents arrived 15 minutes before the hearing, accompanied by Marcus Delacroix and my brother Diego. They looked like they were attending a funeral, grim, resigned, and completely unprepared for what was about to happen. My mother tried to approach me before the hearing began. "Isabella, please, let's just talk about this like a family. This legal drama is tearing us apart." "We are talking about it like a family," I replied. "We're talking about it like a family that respects legal obligations and honors the wishes of its deceased members." Judge Ramirez entered the courtroom with the kind of presence that immediately commanded respect. She was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and piercing dark eyes, but her authority was absolute. "This court is convened to address the matter of the Rosa Martinez Trust and the actions taken by the interim trustees," she began. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, I'm going to ask you directly. Did you obtain written consent from all trustees before proceeding with the sale of trust assets?" My father stood slowly. "Your Honor, we were managing the estate in the best interests of the family. Our daughter has been busy with her career, and we didn't want to burden her with these details." "Mr. Martinez, that's not what I asked. Did you obtain written consent from all trustees as required by the trust documents?" We didn't realize Isabella was a trustee. The documents were complicated, and our lawyer told us we had the authority to make these decisions." Judge Ramirez turned to Marcus Delacroix. "Counselor, did you review the trust documents before advising your clients that they could proceed with the sale?" Delacroix shifted uncomfortably. "Your Honor, we relied on the client's understanding of their authority as interim trustees. So you advised them to complete a transaction worth over $3 million without actually reading the legal documents that governed their authority?" The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Judge Ramirez continued, her voice growing sharper with each word. "Mr. and Mrs. Martinez, you violated your fiduciary duty as trustees. You acted without proper authority, and you excluded the primary beneficiary from a decision that legally required her consent. But what troubles me most is your apparent belief that family relationships exempt you from legal obligations." She turned to me. "Ms. Martinez, please approach the bench." I stood and walked forward, feeling the weight of history in that moment. 3 generations of Martinez women had fought for respect and recognition in their own ways. Rosa through business acumen and strategic planning, me through education and legal expertise, and now, standing before a Latina judge who had broken her own barriers, I was claiming the power they had both worked to secure for me. "Ms. Martinez, do you wish to assume full control of your grandmother's estate as the primary beneficiary and sole remaining trustee?" "Yes, Your Honor." "And do you understand the responsibilities that come with that authority?" "I do, Your Honor." I understand that my grandmother trusted me to use her legacy wisely, to honor her memory through my actions, and to never forget that true wealth comes from lifting others up, not from keeping them down. Judge Ramirez smiled, the first time her stern expression had softened during the entire hearing. "Then by the authority vested in this court, I hereby remove Mr. and Mrs. Martinez as trustees of the Rosa Martinez Trust for violation of their fiduciary duties, and I grant full trustee authority to Isabella Martinez as the sole trustee and primary beneficiary. The sale of trust assets is declared invalid and must be reversed immediately." As the gavel fell, I felt a profound sense of completion. Rosa Martinez's plan had worked exactly as she had intended. Her granddaughter now controlled not just the inheritance, but the power to decide how it would be used to make the world better. My parents sat in stunned silence, finally understanding that their daughter was not the accommodating little girl they had always managed to control. Diego stared at me like he was seeing a stranger, someone he had never bothered to really know. But I felt no anger toward them anymore, only a deep sadness for everything they had never understood about me, about Rosa, about the power that comes from refusing to accept less than you deserve. As I walked out of the courtroom, I thought about the young women who would benefit from the Rosa Martinez Scholarship Fund, about the cases I could now take without worrying about billable hours, about the legacy I could build on the foundation my grandmother had so carefully constructed. For the first time in my life, I had the resources to be exactly who I was meant to be, and that person was going to change everything. 3 weeks after the court hearing, I stood in the beautifully restored kitchen of Rosa Martinez's Victorian house, watching the morning sun stream through windows that now belonged to me without question or compromise. The house had been returned to the trust within 48 hours of Judge Ramirez's ruling, and I had spent the intervening weeks not just moving in, but transforming the space into something that honored both my grandmother's memory and my own vision for the future. The first thing I had done was convert the large formal dining room into a conference space where I could meet with clients who needed legal representation but couldn't afford traditional attorney fees. The Rosa Martinez Legal Clinic was already taking shape, with law students from Northwestern volunteering their time and experienced attorneys offering pro bono hours to support cases that might otherwise go unrepresented. But the real transformation was happening in ways my family never could have anticipated. The morning after I had gained full control of the estate, I received a call from Maria Santos, a young woman whose family had been displaced by a landlord's illegal eviction practices. She had heard about my work through the immigrant community network that my grandmother had been part of for decades, and she was desperate for help that she couldn't afford. "Ms. Martinez," she said, her voice shaking with exhaustion and fear, "we have nowhere else to turn. My children are sleeping in our car because this man threw out all our belongings while we were at work. He said if we complained, he would call immigration, even though we have our papers." This was exactly the kind of case that the Rosa Martinez Legal Clinic had been designed to handle. I spent the next week building Maria's case, documenting the landlord's violations of tenant protection laws, gathering evidence of his pattern of targeting immigrant families with intimidation tactics, and preparing a lawsuit that would not only restore her family's housing, but also prevent him from victimizing others. The landlord's attorney was confident he could intimidate a small legal clinic into accepting a minimal settlement. He clearly hadn't researched my background or realized that the little immigration lawyer he was facing had 7 years of experience taking down much more powerful opponents. When we walked into the settlement conference, I presented a case so thoroughly documented and legally airtight that the landlord not only had to restore Maria's family to their apartment and compensate them for their losses, but also had to submit to court monitoring of his rental practices for the next 5 years. "How did you gather all this evidence so quickly?" Maria asked me afterward, tears of relief streaming down her face. "When you have the resources to fight properly, you can do things that seem impossible," I told her. "Your grandmother Rosa, she would be so proud of what you're doing," Maria said. "She always told us that education was the key to everything, that knowledge was the one thing no one could take away from us." That comment stayed with me as I continued building the Legal Clinic and Scholarship Fund. Rosa Martinez had understood something profound about power and justice, that real change happened not through individual victories, but through creating systems that could protect and empower entire communities. Within 6 weeks of taking control of the estate, the Rosa Martinez Scholarship Fund had awarded its first 3 scholarships to young Latinas pursuing law degrees. Each recipient received not just tuition assistance, but also mentorship, internship opportunities, and access to a network of professionals who were committed to their success. The first recipient was Carmen Rodriguez, a first-generation college student whose parents cleaned office buildings at night to pay for her education. Carmen had been working 3 part-time jobs while maintaining a 3.8 GPA in her pre-law program, but she was facing the possibility of dropping out because her family couldn't afford law school tuition. "Ms. Martinez," she said when I called, to tell her about the scholarship. "I don't understand. Why me? I'm nobody special." "Carmen, you're working 3 jobs, maintaining excellent grades, and still finding time to volunteer at a legal aid clinic. You're not nobody special. You're exactly the kind of person my grandmother would have recognized as having unlimited potential." The scholarship covered not just Carmen's tuition, but also provided her with a paid internship at my law firm, where she could gain practical experience while completing her degree. Watching her confidence grow as she realized that someone believed in her potential reminded me of my own journey from overlooked family member to successful attorney. But perhaps the most satisfying transformation was happening with my own family dynamics. Diego's construction company, deprived of the capital injection they had been counting on, was forced to make some difficult but ultimately healthy business decisions. Instead of expanding too quickly with borrowed money, they had to focus on completing their existing contracts efficiently and building a reputation for quality work. 3 months after the court hearing, Diego called me for the first time since the legal proceedings had concluded. His voice was different, less entitled, more genuine than I had heard in years. "Isabella, I owe you an apology," he said. "I spent so long thinking of you as my little sister who was just playing at being a lawyer that I never really saw what you had accomplished. The way you handled the estate situation, it was masterful, completely professional, and totally fair, even though we didn't deserve fairness. Diego, I never wanted to hurt your business or put your employees at risk, but I couldn't let our family's pattern of dismissing my worth continue, especially when it involved dishonoring Grandma Rosa's wishes. I get that now, and honestly, being forced to slow down and focus on quality instead of rapid expansion has been good for the company. We're landing better contracts because clients know we're not overextended. We're building something sustainable, instead of just something big." The conversation with Diego opened the door for a different kind of relationship with my family, one based on mutual respect rather than childhood dynamics that had never been healthy. My parents took longer to come around, but eventually even they began to acknowledge that their daughter had become someone they had never expected or understood. The real measure of transformation, though, came through the young women who were benefiting from the opportunities Rosa Martinez had made possible. Carmen Rodriguez was thriving in law school, already distinguishing herself in mock trial competitions and catching the attention of professors who were recommending her for prestigious clerkships. The second scholarship recipient, Ana Morales, was using her law degree to specialize in immigration advocacy, helping families navigate complex legal processes that could determine their entire future in the United States. The third, Isabella Cruz, whom I had insisted they name for themselves rather than for me, was focusing on labor law, working to protect workers from the kind of exploitation that had historically targeted immigrant communities. Each of these young women represented a multiplication of Rosa Martinez's vision. She had invested in one granddaughter's potential, and that investment was now creating opportunities for dozens of other young women who would go on to impact thousands of lives throughout their careers. But the most unexpected development came when I received a call from Elizabeth Morrison, my grandmother's estate planning attorney, 6 months after taking control of the inheritance. "Isabella, I have something that might interest you. Another family has approached me about creating a trust similar to the one your grandmother established. They want to ensure that their daughter's inheritance can't be manipulated by family members who might not share their vision for her future." The family was the Washingtons, an African-American couple who had built a successful medical practice but were concerned about relatives who had already made comments about how their daughter's medical school fund could be better used to help other family members with more immediate financial needs. They specifically asked for me because they heard about how well Rosa's trust protections worked, Elizabeth continued. They want to establish not just inheritance protection, but also scholarship funds and a foundation that will support other young women pursuing medical careers. Working with the Washington family to create their legacy plan became a passion project that consumed my evenings and weekends. Dr. Sarah Washington and her husband, Dr. Michael Washington, had built their practice in an underserved community, providing health care to families who might otherwise go without medical attention. Their daughter, Keisha, was a brilliant pre-med student who dreamed of becoming a pediatric surgeon, but they had watched other talented young people in their extended family get pressured into abandoning their educational goals to provide immediate financial support for relatives. "We don't want Keisha to ever have to choose between her dreams and family pressure," Dr. Sarah Washington told me during one of our planning sessions. "We want her to have the same kind of protection your grandmother gave you, the legal framework, to pursue her potential without compromise." Creating the Washington Family Medical Education Trust became a template that other families began requesting. Word spread through professional networks about an estate planning approach that could protect ambitious young people from family members who didn't understand or support their goals. Within a year, I was consulting on trust creation for families across Chicago, helping parents and grandparents build legal frameworks that would empower the next generation rather than limit them. Each trust was customized for the specific family dynamics and potential challenges, but they all shared the same core principle: protecting the potential of young people who were determined to build something meaningful with their lives. The consulting work led to speaking engagements at law schools, financial planning conferences, and community organizations. I found myself sharing the stage with other successful women who had overcome family limitations and societal expectations to build careers that made a difference. At Northwestern Law School, where I had once been just another ambitious student trying to prove herself, I was now returning as a guest lecturer teaching courses on estate planning and family wealth protection. The irony wasn't lost on me. The same legal principles that had protected my inheritance were now helping me teach the next generation of lawyers how to protect their own clients' legacies. "The most important thing to understand," I told my students during one memorable lecture, "is that estate planning isn't just about distributing money and property. It's about protecting potential. It's about ensuring that people who have worked hard to build something meaningful can pass on not just their wealth, but their values and their vision for the future." One student raised her hand. "Professor Martinez, what advice would you give to someone whose family doesn't understand or support their career goals?" I thought about Rosa Martinez, standing in her grocery store and quietly planning ways to protect a granddaughter whose potential she could see even when no one else could. I thought about Judge Ramirez, fighting for recognition in a legal system that had tried to limit her at every turn. I thought about Carmen Rodriguez, working 3 jobs while maintaining excellent grades because she refused to let financial obstacles destroy her dreams. "Build your own foundation," I said. "Don't wait for other people to believe in your potential. Create the support systems, the financial resources, and the legal protections that will allow you to pursue your goals regardless of whether anyone else understands them. And then, once you've built something meaningful, make sure you create opportunities for other people who are facing the same challenges you once faced." After class, several students approached me with their own stories of family pressure to abandon their educational goals, of relatives who saw law school as a luxury rather than an investment in the future. I found myself becoming not just a professor, but a mentor for young people who were navigating the same tensions between family loyalty and personal ambition that I had experienced. The Rosa Martinez Legal Clinic had grown into a full-fledged, nonprofit organization with a staff of 12 attorneys and paralegals, serving hundreds of clients each year. The scholarship fund was supporting 23 law students across the Midwest, and we had begun expanding into undergraduate scholarships for pre-law students who showed exceptional promise. But perhaps the most meaningful development was the relationship I had built with my parents and Diego. It had taken almost 2 years, but we had gradually developed a new dynamic based on mutual respect, rather than the old patterns of dismissal and favoritism. My father, in particular, had undergone a transformation that surprised everyone. He began attending the legal clinic's community education workshops, learning about tenant rights and immigration law, so he could better advise the workers who were employed by Diego's construction company. I realized, he told me during one of our monthly family dinners, that I spent so many years thinking I knew what was best for you that I never bothered to learn what you were actually capable of. Your grandmother saw something in you that I was too stubborn to recognize. The monthly family dinners had become a tradition, held in Rosa Martinez's house, now fully restored and serving as both my home and the headquarters for the legal clinic. We would gather around the same table where Rosa had once fed 3 generations of Martinez family members. But now the conversations were different, focused on the meaningful work each of us was doing, rather than the old dynamics of competition and comparison. Diego's construction company had become a model employer in the Chicago area, providing not just good wages but also benefits and career development opportunities for workers who were often exploited by other contractors. He had discovered that treating employees well was not just ethically right, but also good business practice. "You know what's funny?" Diego said during one of these dinners. "All those years when I thought I was the successful one and you were just playing at being a lawyer, I was actually building a small, struggling business while you were developing the skills and knowledge that would let you impact thousands of lives." My mother had perhaps changed the most of all. She had begun volunteering at the legal clinic, using her bilingual skills to help clients navigate intake processes and understand their legal options. She had discovered a talent for community outreach, organizing workshops and information sessions that connected immigrant families with the legal resources they needed. "I used to think that success meant keeping the family together at any cost," she told me one evening as we were cleaning up after a particularly busy day at the clinic. "But I understand now that real success means helping each person in the family become the best version of themselves, even if that means they outgrow what you thought you wanted for them." As I stood in my grandmother's kitchen that evening, looking out at the neighborhood she had served for so many decades, I realized that Rosa Martinez's legacy had grown far beyond anything she could have imagined when she first began planning for my future. She had wanted to protect one granddaughter's potential, but her investment had created a ripple effect that was now protecting and empowering an entire community of young women. The house phone rang. Yes, Rosa Martinez had insisted on keeping a landline, and I had maintained that tradition. It was Carmen Rodriguez, now in her final semester of law school, calling to tell me that she had been accepted to a federal clerkship with a judge who was known for taking on groundbreaking civil rights cases. "Ms. Martinez, none of this would have been possible without the scholarship and the opportunities you've created. I want you to know that I'm going to spend my career fighting for families like mine, families like your grandmother's." After I hung up, I sat quietly in the kitchen where Rosa Martinez had made countless decisions about how to build something lasting for her family. I could feel her presence in the house, in the neighborhood, in the continuing impact of the choices she had made decades earlier. Rosa Martinez had taught me that true power came not from defeating your opponents, but from building something so strong and positive that it continued growing long after you were gone. She had shown me that the greatest victory was not proving people wrong about your limitations, but creating opportunities for others to exceed even your own accomplishments. As I prepared for another day of cases, consultations, and teaching, I realized that I had finally become the woman Rosa Martinez had always known I could be. Not despite my family's limitations, but because she had given me the tools to transcend them while still maintaining the values that connected me to my roots. The inheritance she had left me wasn't just money and property. It was the foundation for a legacy that would continue expanding, one young woman at a time, for generations to come. 2 years had passed since that pivotal court hearing, and I was standing in the ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel, surrounded by 300 of Chicago's most influential legal professionals, community leaders, and advocates for social justice. Tonight was the annual Rosa Martinez Foundation Gala, an event that had grown from a simple scholarship fund into something that was reshaping how the legal community approached mentorship and opportunity creation. The transformation had been remarkable not just in scope, but in the unexpected directions it had taken. What began as my grandmother's plan to protect one granddaughter's inheritance had evolved into a movement that was creating systemic change across multiple industries and communities. Standing at the podium, looking out at faces that included federal judges, state legislators, corporate executives, and grassroots activists, I felt the weight of Rosa Martinez's vision made manifest. But tonight wasn't about celebrating what we had already accomplished. It was about announcing the next phase of expansion that would take her legacy to a national level. 3 years ago, I began, my voice carrying clearly through the hushed ballroom. My grandmother, Rosa Martinez, made a decision that she thought would protect one person's future. She could never have imagined that her careful planning would become the foundation for a movement that is now impacting thousands of lives across the Midwest. The audience included Carmen Rodriguez, now a rising star in the federal public defender's office, who had successfully argued her first case before the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals just 2 months earlier. Sitting beside her was Ana Morales, who had launched her own immigration law practice and was already being recognized as one of the most effective advocates for asylum seekers in the region. But they represented just the beginning of Rosa's expanding influence. The scholarship program had grown to support 67 students pursuing legal careers, while the legal clinic had expanded into 3 locations across Chicago and had begun training other cities on how to replicate our community-focused model of legal services. Tonight, I continued, I'm excited to announce that the Rosa Martinez Foundation is launching our national expansion initiative. Over the next 5 years, we will be establishing legal clinics and scholarship programs in 12 major cities, creating a network of support for young women who are determined to use the law as a tool for justice and positive change. The applause was thunderous, but what moved me most was seeing my parents in the front row, their faces glowing with a pride that had taken years to develop. My father had become one of the foundation's most effective board members, using his business experience to help establish sustainable funding models for new programs. My mother had transformed into a gifted fundraiser, her natural warmth and storytelling ability helping donors understand the personal impact of their contributions. Diego was there too, accompanied by his wife Maria and their 2 young daughters. His construction company had become the foundation's preferred contractor for clinic renovations and new facility construction, but more importantly, he had become one of my closest advisors on operational strategy and community outreach. The evening's keynote speaker was Justice Elena Rodriguez, the first Latina to serve on the Illinois Supreme Court, who had agreed to chair the foundation's National Advisory Board. Justice Rodriguez had grown up in the same neighborhood where Rosa Martinez had built her grocery store, and she understood intimately the challenges faced by young women who dared to dream beyond their circumstances. The Rosa Martinez Foundation represents something revolutionary in how we think about mentorship and opportunity creation, Justice Rodriguez said during her remarks. This isn't charity. This is investment. Investment in human potential that pays dividends for entire communities, for generations. As the evening progressed, I found myself in conversations that revealed just how far-reaching Rosa's influence had become. Dr. Sarah Washington approached me with news that the medical education trust we had created for her daughter had inspired similar initiatives among physician families across the region. Keisha is thriving in medical school, Dr. Washington told me, but more importantly, she's already talking about establishing her own foundation to support young women pursuing surgical specialties. Your grandmother's vision is creating leaders who understand that success includes lifting others up. The most unexpected conversation of the evening came from Judge Patricia Ramirez, who had presided over the original estate hearing and had become a mentor and friend in the years since. Isabella, she said, drawing me aside during the cocktail reception, I've been approached by the governor's office about a possible appointment to the federal bench. They're looking for candidates who have demonstrated exceptional legal expertise, combined with a commitment to community service. My heart stopped. A federal judgeship represented the pinnacle of legal achievement, the opportunity to impact not just individual cases, but to shape legal precedent that would influence the justice system for decades. I'm honored that they would consider me, I replied. But the foundation work is at such a critical juncture with the national expansion. Judge Ramirez smiled knowingly. Isabella, what do you think your grandmother would say about this opportunity? Do you think she would want you to limit your impact to protect what you've already built? Or would she encourage you to use every platform available to create positive change? That question stayed with me for weeks after the gala. Rosa Martinez had never been content with small victories or limited influence. She had constantly looked for ways to expand her impact, to build something bigger and more lasting than what already existed. The federal appointment process would take months, involving extensive background checks, interviews, and hearings. But as I considered the possibility, I realized that Judge Ramirez was right. Rosa would have encouraged me to pursue every opportunity to maximize my ability to protect and empower others. In the meantime, the Foundation's expansion was accelerating, beyond our most optimistic projections. The pilot program in Milwaukee had been so successful that we were receiving requests from cities across the country asking for assistance in establishing similar programs. The model we had developed was proving to be replicable and sustainable. Each new location combined legal services for underserved communities with scholarship programs for promising students, creating a pipeline that ensured the next generation of lawyers would be prepared to continue the work. But perhaps the most meaningful validation came from an unexpected source. 6 months after the gala, I received a call from Marcus Delacroix, the attorney who had represented my parents during the original estate dispute. Ms. Martinez, he said, his voice carrying a humility that had been completely absent during our previous interactions. I owe you an apology. When I took your parents' case, I thought I was dealing with a family squabble that could be resolved through negotiation and compromise. I completely underestimated both the legal complexity of the situation and your expertise in handling it. Mr. Delacroix, that's not necessary. Actually, it is necessary. I've been following the work of the Rosa Martinez Foundation, and I realize now that what I witnessed during that estate case wasn't just a legal victory. It was the beginning of something transformational. I'd like to make a contribution to the foundation, and I'd also like to offer my services pro bono for any complex estate planning work that might help other families protect their children's potential, the way your grandmother protected yours. The offer was both unexpected and deeply meaningful. Marcus Delacroix was one of Chicago's most expensive estate planning attorneys, and his pro bono commitment would allow the foundation to provide sophisticated legal protections for families who could never afford such services on their own. I want to help create more stories like yours, he continued. Stories where young people's potential is protected and nurtured rather than limited by family dynamics or financial constraints. This conversation led to the establishment of the Foundation's Estate Planning Initiative, which provided free trust and will preparation services for families who wanted to ensure their children's educational and career goals would be protected, regardless of changing family circumstances. The initiative attracted volunteer attorneys from across the region, many of whom had their own stories of overcoming family limitations or financial obstacles. Within 18 months, we had helped over 400 families create comprehensive estate plans designed to empower rather than control the next generation. But the work that gave me the deepest satisfaction was the mentorship program that had emerged organically from the scholarship initiative. Each scholarship recipient was paired not just with financial support, but with a network of professional mentors who provided guidance on everything from course selection to career strategy to work-life balance. Carmen Rodriguez had become one of our most effective mentors, working with first-year law students who were struggling with the transition from undergraduate studies to the rigorous demands of legal education. Her approach was both practical and inspirational, helping students develop the skills they needed while maintaining connection to the values that had motivated them to pursue law in the first place. The most important thing I learned from Ms. Martinez and the Foundation, Carmen told a group of new scholarship recipients during one of our quarterly workshops, is that success isn't just about individual achievement. Real success is about using your accomplishments to create opportunities for other people who are facing the same challenges you once faced. The workshop series had become one of our most popular programs, bringing together scholarship recipients, mentor attorneys, and community leaders for intensive sessions on topics ranging from financial literacy to professional networking to public speaking. But the sessions I treasured most were the ones focused on what we called legacy thinking, helping young professionals develop long-term visions for how they wanted to impact their communities and the legal profession. During one particularly memorable session, a second-year law student named Sofia Gutierrez raised her hand during a discussion about career planning. "Ms. Martinez," she said, "I keep hearing about the importance of having a 5-year plan and a 10-year plan, but honestly, I'm still trying to figure out how to pay for next semester's books. How do you balance immediate survival needs with long-term vision?" The question struck me as profoundly important because it highlighted the daily reality faced by most of our scholarship recipients. These were young women who were juggling multiple jobs, family obligations, and academic demands while trying to maintain focus on distant career goals. "Sophia, that's exactly the right question to ask," I replied. "Your grandmother Rosa faced the same challenge when she was building her business. She needed to focus on daily survival, paying rent, buying inventory, serving customers, while also planning for long-term growth and security." I shared the story of how Rosa had maintained 2 separate bank accounts throughout her business-building years, one for immediate operational needs and another for long-term investment and expansion. She had trained herself to think simultaneously about today's challenges and tomorrow's opportunities. "The key," I continued, "is to make sure that your survival strategies are also building toward your long-term goals. When you're choosing between different part-time jobs, pick the one that will give you relevant experience or networking connections. When you're selecting courses, balance immediate graduation requirements with skills that will serve your career. Vision. Every decision becomes an opportunity to move closer to your ultimate objectives." This conversation inspired the creation of our Financial Empowerment Program, which taught scholarship recipients not just how to manage their current resources, but how to make strategic decisions that would build wealth and create opportunities throughout their careers. The program was facilitated by successful attorneys, financial advisors, and business leaders who volunteered their time to share practical knowledge about everything from student loan management to investment planning to entrepreneurship. But, more importantly, it connected young women with role models who had successfully navigated the transition from financial struggle to professional success. One of our most popular workshops was led by Dr. Maria Gonzalez, who had built a successful medical practice while paying off over $200,000 in student loan debt. Her presentation on building wealth while building your career always drew standing-room-only crowds. "The biggest mistake I made in my 20s, Dr. Gonzalez told one audience, was thinking that I had to choose between paying off debt and building wealth. I spent years making minimum payments on everything while living paycheck to paycheck, even though I was earning a good income. What I wish I had understood earlier is that strategic debt management and wealth building can happen simultaneously if you have the right plan and the right support system." These workshops were creating a generation of young professionals who understood not just how to achieve individual success, but how to build and maintain the kind of generational wealth that could protect and empower their own families for decades to come. The federal judgeship opportunity continued to develop throughout this period. The interview process was rigorous and comprehensive, involving meetings with senators, FBI background investigations, and extensive review of my legal writings and judicial philosophy. During one particularly intensive interview with the Senate Judiciary Committee's staff, I was asked to explain how my community-focused legal work would translate to the objectivity required of a federal judge. My experience with the Rosa Martinez Foundation has taught me that true objectivity requires understanding the real-world impact of legal decisions on all members of society. I responded. A judge who has only worked with wealthy corporate clients may think they're being objective, but they're actually bringing unconscious bias toward protecting established power structures. My work with underserved communities has given me insight into how the law affects people across the entire economic spectrum. The confirmation process would take months, but regardless of the outcome, I knew that the foundation work would continue to expand and evolve. We had built something sustainable and self-perpetuating, with strong leadership and clear systems that could function effectively, even if my role changed. More importantly, we had proven that Rosa Martinez's vision was both scalable and replicable. The combination of legal services, educational support, and mentorship could create lasting change in any community where dedicated people were willing to implement it consistently. As I stood in my grandmother's kitchen one evening, reviewing applications for the next round of scholarships, I was struck by the diversity and ambition of the young women who were seeking our support. Their backgrounds varied dramatically. Some were recent immigrants, others were first-generation college students. Still others were returning to education after raising families or serving in the military. But they all shared the same essential quality that Rosa Martinez had recognized in me decades earlier: the determination to build something meaningful with their lives, regardless of the obstacles they faced or the people who doubted their potential. Reading their personal statements, I was reminded again and again of my grandmother's fundamental insight that the most powerful investment anyone can make is in the potential of young people who are determined to use their success to create positive change in the world. One application particularly moved me. It was from a young woman named Isabella Ramirez. Named, her essay explained, after both me and Judge Patricia Ramirez, who had become heroes in her immigrant community. My parents brought me to Chicago when I was 8 years old, she wrote. They worked multiple jobs to keep our family housed and fed, but they always told me that education was the only thing that could never be taken away from me. When I heard about the Rosa Martinez Foundation, I realized that someone had created exactly the kind of support system that my parents had dreamed of, but never had access to themselves. Isabella Ramirez was studying pre-law at the University of Illinois with a focus on immigration advocacy. Her grades were exceptional, her community service was extensive, and her personal statement revealed the kind of strategic thinking and commitment to justice that would make her an extraordinary lawyer. But what impressed me most was her long-term vision. She had already developed a detailed plan for establishing legal clinics, specifically focused on serving rural immigrant communities that were often overlooked by urban-based advocacy organizations. My goal, she concluded her essay, is to create a network of legal services that can reach families regardless of where they live or what languages they speak. I want to build something that will honor the sacrifices my parents made while creating opportunities for the next generation of immigrant children who are growing up with big dreams and limited resources. Reading her application, I realized that Rosa Martinez's legacy was entering its third generation. The young woman I had been, uncertain, underestimated but determined, had been empowered to create opportunities for women like Carmen Rodriguez and Ana Morales. Now those women were inspiring and supporting a new generation of leaders like Isabella Ramirez, who would undoubtedly create their own innovations and expansions of our shared mission. That night, I called Elizabeth Morrison to share the news about Isabella Ramirez's application and to discuss the federal judgeship possibility. Elizabeth, I keep thinking about something Rosa wrote in that letter she left me. She said that I had the heart of a fighter and the mind of a strategist, and that this combination was my superpower. I'm wondering if a federal judgeship is where I can have the greatest strategic impact. Elizabeth was quiet for a moment before responding. Isabella, your grandmother built her grocery store one customer at a time, but she always had a vision for how it could serve the entire neighborhood. The foundation work you've done is like building the grocery store, creating something concrete and immediate that serves people's daily needs. The federal bench might be like expanding to serve the entire neighborhood, using your position to create systemic change that protects and empowers people you'll never meet personally. As I hung up the phone and prepared for another day of cases, consultations, and foundation work, I realized that Rosa Martinez had given me something even more valuable than financial security or professional success. She had given me the understanding that true power comes from creating systems that continue growing and improving long after their founders are gone. Whether my future included a federal judgeship or continued expansion of the foundation work, I knew that Rosa's legacy would continue multiplying through every life we touched, every barrier we dismantled, and every young woman we empowered to build something meaningful with her own potential. The inheritance she had protected for me had become an inheritance I was protecting for generations yet to come. The confirmation hearing for my federal judgeship nomination took place on a crisp October morning in Washington, D.C. As I sat at the witness table facing the Senate Judiciary Committee, I could see my parents, Diego, and several foundation scholarship recipients in the gallery behind me. The sight of Carmen Rodriguez, now a successful federal prosecutor, sitting next to my mother, filled me with a profound sense of how far we had all traveled from that day when my inheritance was nearly stolen. Senator Patricia Williams, the committee chair, opened the hearing with a question that cut straight to the heart of why I was there. Judge Martinez, if confirmed, you would be one of the youngest federal judges appointed in the last decade, and your background is quite different from traditional judicial nominees. Can you explain how your experience building legal clinics and scholarship programs has prepared you for the federal bench? I had spent weeks preparing for this moment, but my answer came from something deeper than preparation. It came from the years of watching Rosa Martinez's vision transform from a single trust document into a movement that was changing lives across the country. Senator Williams, my grandmother taught me that the law is only as powerful as its ability to protect and empower the most vulnerable members of society. My work with the Rosa Martinez Foundation has given me firsthand experience with how federal law impacts real families facing real challenges, from immigration cases to civil rights violations to complex estate disputes. This experience hasn't made me biased toward any particular outcome, but it has made me deeply aware of the responsibility that comes with judicial authority. Senator James Crawford, known for his skeptical questioning of progressive nominees, leaned forward with a challenge I had anticipated. Ms. Martinez, some critics argue that your foundation work represents advocacy rather than the impartial application of law. How can the Senate be confident that you would set aside your activist background to serve as an objective federal judge? The question gave me an opportunity to share the lesson that had perhaps been most important in my journey from overlooked daughter to potential federal judge. Senator Crawford, the most valuable thing my experience has taught me is that true objectivity requires understanding all perspectives, not just the ones that come from privilege and power. When I represented pharmaceutical companies early in my career, I learned how corporate interests approach legal challenges. When I worked with immigrant families through our legal clinics, I learned how ordinary people experience the justice system. A judge who has only seen one side of that equation isn't objective. They're limited. The hearing continued for nearly 4 hours, with questions ranging from my judicial philosophy to specific cases I had handled to my views on constitutional interpretation. But the moment that would later be cited in news coverage came when Senator Maria Gonzalez asked about the personal experience that had most shaped my understanding of justice. Senator Gonzalez, 3 years ago, I discovered that my parents had sold my inheritance without my knowledge or consent. I could have responded with anger, with family drama, or with resignation to being treated as less important than my brother. Instead, I chose to enforce the legal protections my grandmother had carefully built into her estate plan. That experience taught me that justice isn't about revenge or emotion. It's about the consistent, impartial application of law to protect people's rights, regardless of family dynamics or social pressure. I could see several committee members nodding, understanding that this wasn't just a personal anecdote, but a demonstration of how I approached conflict resolution and legal principle. The committee vote was scheduled for the following week, but the real validation came in the days immediately following the hearing. Legal scholars, bar associations, and civil rights organizations issued statements supporting my nomination, but the endorsement that meant the most came from an unexpected source. Judge Patricia Ramirez, who had presided over my original estate case, submitted a letter to the committee that was later read into the record during the confirmation vote. I have observed Isabella Martinez's legal career from its early stages, through her current national prominence, Judge Ramirez wrote. She possesses that rare combination of intellectual rigor, practical wisdom, and moral courage that defines truly exceptional judges. Her work building legal institutions that serve underrepresented communities demonstrates exactly the kind of leadership our federal judiciary needs. The confirmation vote was 14-8, largely along party lines, but with 2 Republican senators, joining the Democratic majority. Senator Crawford, despite his skeptical questioning, ultimately voted in favor, stating that my legal qualifications were unquestionably strong and that my community service record demonstrated a commitment to the rule of law that transcends political ideology. The swearing-in ceremony was held 3 weeks later in the ceremonial courtroom of the 7th Circuit Court of Appeals. Chief Judge Michael Thompson administered the oath while my family, foundation colleagues, and legal mentors looked on. But the moment that captured the true significance of the occasion came when Carmen Rodriguez approached me after the ceremony. "Judge Martinez," she said, testing out my new title with a smile, "I want you to know that watching you navigate the confirmation process taught me something important about leadership. You never lost sight of the Foundation's mission, even when you were pursuing this incredible personal achievement. You showed all of us that individual success and community service aren't competing priorities, they're mutually reinforcing." Carmen was right about the Foundation's continued growth during the confirmation process. Rather than slowing down our work, the national attention had accelerated our expansion into new cities and attracted major funding commitments from philanthropic organizations that wanted to support our model. The most significant development was a $12 million grant from the Ford Foundation to establish Rosa Martinez legal centers in 8 additional cities over the next 3 years. Each center would combine legal services for underserved communities with scholarship programs for promising law students, creating a network that could eventually span the entire country. But perhaps more importantly, we had begun receiving requests from international organizations interested in adapting our model for other countries. A delegation from Mexico had visited our Chicago headquarters to learn about our approach to combining legal services with educational support, and similar inquiries had come from Canada, the United Kingdom, and several countries in Latin America. "Your grandmother's vision is becoming global," Elizabeth Morrison told me during a celebration dinner following the swearing-in ceremony. "She protected one granddaughter's inheritance, and that protection is now creating opportunities for young women on multiple continents." As I settled into my new role as a federal judge, I discovered that the skills I had developed building the foundation translated surprisingly well to the federal bench. The ability to listen carefully to diverse perspectives, to identify the core legal principles at stake in complex disputes, and to craft decisions that would serve the broader cause of justice. These were all capabilities that had been strengthened through years of foundation work. My first major case involved a class action lawsuit challenging discriminatory lending practices that had disproportionately impacted Latino families seeking home mortgages. The legal issues were complex, involving multiple federal statutes and extensive factual disputes, but the case reminded me why Rosa Martinez's protections had been so important. The families bringing the lawsuit had been systematically excluded from home ownership opportunities through practices that were technically legal but practically discriminatory. They needed a legal system that would look beyond surface compliance to examine the real-world impact of financial institutions' policies. As I reviewed the case materials and listened to oral arguments, I thought about my grandmother's grocery store and the neighborhood families who had depended on her fair treatment and community investment. Rosa Martinez had understood that building wealth and opportunity required not just individual initiative, but also institutional fairness and community support. The decision I ultimately issued found that the lending practices violated federal fair housing laws, not because they explicitly discriminated based on race or ethnicity, but because they created systems that had the effect of limiting opportunities for protected classes. The ruling established new precedent for how federal courts could evaluate discriminatory impact in financial services, and it resulted in a settlement that provided both compensation for affected families and systematic changes to ensure fair lending practices going forward. Legal commentators called it one of the most significant civil rights decisions in the circuit in over a decade, but for me, it felt like a natural extension of the work I had been doing with the foundation, using legal authority to create systems that protected and empowered people who might otherwise be excluded from opportunity. The most meaningful feedback came from Isabella Ramirez, the scholarship recipient who had been named after Judge Ramirez and me. She had just completed her first year of law school and was spending the summer interning at one of our legal centers. "Judge Martinez," she wrote in a letter that arrived a month after the lending decision was announced, "reading your opinion was like seeing everything I've been learning about in law school put into practice to help families like mine. You didn't just apply the law. You helped the law live up to its promise of equal justice. This is exactly the kind of judge I hope to become someday." Reading her letter, I realized that Rosa Martinez's legacy had reached a milestone that even she couldn't have imagined. The granddaughter she had protected was now using federal judicial authority to extend those same protections to thousands of families across the region. But the work was far from finished. The foundation had grown to serve over 300 scholarship recipients and operate legal centers in 15 cities. But the demand for our services continued to outpace our capacity. Every month brought new requests from communities that needed legal advocacy and from young women who needed educational support to pursue their dreams. During my first year on the federal bench, I maintained my role as chairman of the foundation's board, participating in strategic planning sessions and major fundraising events, while carefully maintaining the ethical boundaries required of my judicial position. The foundation had become financially self-sustaining and operationally independent, but my continued involvement helped ensure that Rosa Martinez's original vision remained central to all our expansion efforts. The annual gala had grown into one of Chicago's most prestigious philanthropic events, attracting supporters from across the legal profession, business community, and political establishment. But the evening I treasured most was our smaller annual dinner for scholarship recipients, foundation staff, and major volunteers. At the most recent dinner, held in the community room of our flagship legal center, I found myself sitting at a table with Carmen Rodriguez, Ana Morales, Isabella Ramirez, and 3 recent scholarship recipients who were just beginning their legal careers. The conversation ranged from case strategy to career planning to family relationships. But what struck me most was how naturally these young women had embraced the responsibility of mentoring and supporting the next generation. "Judge Martinez," said Maria Santos, one of our newest scholarship recipients, "I want you to know that this program has given me more than financial support for law school. It's given me a vision for what my career can become. Not just individual success, but the opportunity to create lasting change for other people." As I looked around the table at faces representing different backgrounds, different legal specialties, and different stages of career development, I saw Rosa Martinez's most important legacy: a community of women who understood that their individual achievements were meaningful only when they contributed to broader progress toward justice and opportunity. The conversation that evening reminded me of something Judge Ramirez had said during my confirmation hearing. The measure of a truly successful legal career isn't the cases you win or the positions you hold. It's the number of people whose lives are improved because you chose to use your talents in service of justice. Rosa Martinez had given me the foundation to build that kind of career. Now it was my responsibility to ensure that her vision continued expanding, one scholarship recipient at a time, one legal victory at a time, one generation at a time. As I prepared to leave the dinner and return to the federal courthouse where I would spend the next day hearing cases that would impact thousands of lives, I felt the profound satisfaction that comes from knowing that your work is part of something larger than yourself, something that will continue growing and improving long after you're gone. Rosa Martinez had protected her granddaughter's potential. That granddaughter was now protecting the potential of countless others, ensuring that her grandmother's legacy would multiply indefinitely into the future. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.